Good morning, and welcome to this Conservation Applied Research and Development, or CARD, webinar on the Minnesota Codes and Standards Program Roadmap. I'm Mary Sue Lobenstein, the R&D Program Administrator at the Minnesota Department of Commerce, Division of Energy Resources. With me today is Adoy D., who is an Energy Planner Principal in the Conservation Improvement Program unit at the department. Adoy provides oversight and regulation for natural gas and electric utility energy efficiency program as part of the implementation of Minnesota's Energy Efficiency Resource Standard. He has research experience in public policy design, computational modeling, and econometric analysis. Adoy will be handling the Q&A portion of today's webinar. Our presenters today are Alex Chase from 2050 Partners, Tidiao Zhang from Slipstream, and Maureen Colburn from LHB. From 2050 Partners, Alex Chase has provided leadership, execution, and strategy development for energy and climate-related projects. He has helped lead clients in the utility, public agency, and nonprofit sectors to achieve significant success through their energy efficiency, water efficiency, and clean transportation programs. In addition, his work contributing to state, national, and international codes and standards has spanned hundreds of product categories and has played a role in shaping energy and water use and policy in the United States and beyond. At Slipstream, Tianyao Zhang is an energy engineer where she consults with building owners, architects, and engineers to identify and recommend energy conservation measures in commercial buildings. In addition, Tianyao conducts research on new energy efficiency technologies, market characterization studies, and commercial energy code compliance assessments. Maureen Colburn from LHB is the leader of the LHB Research Studio, a team of architects and engineers within an interdisciplinary design firm that explores research questions related to the built environment. Her work informs policies, guidelines, and programs to improve the built environment's impact on natural resources, greenhouse gas emissions, and climate equity. Maureen co-manages the Minnesota Buildings Benchmarking and Beyond suite of programs and tools for sustainable design, the Regional Indicators Initiative, which is an effort to engage communities in actionable strategies for energy and greenhouse gas reduction, and ongoing research into effective ways to reduce energy consumption in commercial buildings. We're very pleased to have this team of experienced researchers for today's webinar. Before we start, I'd like to go over a few webinar basics. All attendees will be in listen-only mode. We'll answer all questions at the end of the presentations, but as questions occur to you, please do send them to all panelists via the Q&A panel. We'll do our best to answer all questions within the time allocated, but if for some reason we don't get to some, we will answer them after the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the department's website, as well as the project page website. The slide set from the webinar will also be available. To provide a little context, this webinar is one in an ongoing series designed to summarize the results from research projects funded by Minnesota's Applied Research and Development Fund, which was established in the Next Generation Energy Act of 2007. The purpose of the fund is to help Minnesota utilities achieve their energy savings goal. $2.6 million is set aside annually for the CARD program, which awards research grants in a competitive request for proposal process. Results from CARD projects provide utilities with data to enhance energy efficiency program designs within their SIP portfolios. As you can see by this pie chart, CARD projects funded to date have been in all building sectors, as well as some that cross multiple sectors. The subject of today's webinar addresses multiple sectors, and summarizes the findings and recommendations from a CARD project, which developed a Minnesota Codes and Standards program roadmap. Now I'm going to turn it over to Alex, who will start today's presentation.
Thank you, Mary Sue. I'd like to thank you, Adway and Anthony Fryer, and the broader Department of Commerce for sponsoring this study. I'd like to first start with providing some project background. I'd like to thank our project team that supported this work, including LHB, the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, or MIA, and Slipstream. I'd also like to thank our technical advisory group that provided very valuable feedback throughout the project. We were fortunate to have 6 utilities on the tag with CenterPoint Energy, Great River Energy, Minnesota Energy, Minnesota Power, Otter Tail Power Company, and Xcel Energy. We also received valuable input from CEE, the Center for Sustainable Building Research, which is at the University of Minnesota, Fresh Energy, and the City of Minneapolis. Our primary project goal was to develop an actionable roadmap, and we strive to do 2 things. One, kind of providing the foundation for developing a robust Minnesota Codes and Standards program in the future that contributes to delivering cost-effective energy savings and greenhouse gas reductions. And second, really recommend pathways for Minnesota utilities to participate in and claim savings from codes and standards activities. So just wanted to highlight that second point. We really did look at this through the lens of a utility-sponsored codes and standards program. When we refer to a codes and standards program, if you're not familiar, we're referring to programs that are run by program administrators, including utilities, within their broader energy efficiency or demand side management portfolios. These activities can vary widely, but they include at least one of the following in the list here. So the program can provide technical support to help with building energy code advancement efforts, can also provide technical support to help with appliance standard advancement efforts. And appliance standards can occur either at the state level or at the national level. Supporting compliance improvement efforts, whether it's through training or other types of stakeholder engagement strategies. Conducting code readiness data collection to make sure there's really valuable data for future rulemakings. And finally, it's really important to have a planning coordination element to really coordinate with stakeholders that are impacted by code and standard rulemakings. This can be both internal to the utility and external to the utility. As part of the project, we received stakeholder feedback in various ways. We conducted several TAG member interviews and solicited their feedback throughout the project. We conducted over a dozen key contact interviews, primarily with individuals involved in codes and standards programs in other states and regions. And we hosted 3 public webinars, each focused on a topic. If you are interested in checking out those webinars, we recorded all of them. There's the presentations are posted, and the keynotes and takeaways are posted as well. Those are included at the project website, and the link is provided here. As part of that stakeholder engagement, we wanted to pull out what the perceived benefits and concerns are. This slide kind of highlights what we heard or some of the top benefits. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. We go into more detail in the report, but did want to highlight a couple of themes here. So I'll just read a couple of these. Codes and standard programs are extremely cost effective. From a utility perspective, cost effectiveness of code and standards is a top benefit. They can enable utilities to be involved in capturing one-time savings opportunities. They can help to reduce carbon emissions and lower consumer energy bills. They can support grid flexibility and EV adoption. They can help to capture savings that are not being captured by traditional energy efficiency programs. They can create opportunities for important new stakeholder touch points, and they can bring relief to utilities looking for the kind of next thing in savings. On the flip side, we asked about what the perceived concerns were, barriers. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but some of the themes that we heard from multiple folks. Increasing code baselines can impact some voluntary energy efficiency programs. Newer updated codes and standards can increase first costs. They can be complex. There's uncertainty with new utility role and stakeholder interactions. How do you ensure that savings are real and fair? And then there's just staffing and resource constraints. So, we can't necessarily solve all these concerns, but we do hope that our report is useful in starting to address them. And we aim to structure some of the recommendations in response to some of these issues. The report covers a lot of ground. Unfortunately, we don't have time to cover everything today. For those new to codes and standards programs, we hope the introduction and background section in the report provides some useful materials. There's a primer on how codes and standards work, and then we get into some of the details in terms of the specifics of codes and standards within Minnesota and on a national basis. But really, for the rest of today's presentations, we're going to highlight elements from the savings analysis section and the recommendations section. So I'll start with giving you a preview of the savings analysis. As a companion to the report, we developed an Excel-based model called the Minnesota Codes and Standards Program Scenario Model. The model allows users to enter many different input assumptions to help develop customized savings scenarios. In our final report, we highlight one scenario for a pretty robust program, but many scenarios exist, and that's why we wanted to structure something that was somewhat flexible. We hope the model is useful for SIP planning and filings, but it's not a direct replacement for that process. In parallel to this project, the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry and Department of Commerce, as a separate project, convened a building efficiency work group. And the work group primarily was formed to kind of examine different policy ideas that could help to make progress on energy efficiency and carbon goals. And it really focused mostly on commercial and large multifamily buildings. They released their final report last month, and it had a lot of important recommendations that kind of tied into this project. I want to highlight the specific recommendation listed here that states, quote, the departments recommend the current statewide commercial energy code be advanced and accelerated such that it achieves net zero by 2036. So this is an important goal. It's one that we think a potential codes and standards program could help to support. And we use this goal as a basis for one of our savings scenario for the building code section, which I'm now going to hand off to Tinya to describe.
Thank you, Alex. First off, before we go into the scenarios for the commercial code, we would like to introduce the ZEPI scale. The Zero Energy Performance Index, also called ZEPI, is developed by the New Buildings Institute and is used to measure commercial building energy performance. It has a scale from 0 to 100, where 100 represents the energy performance of an average building for a given building type, as found in the CBEX 2003 survey. A ZEPI score of 0 represents a building with net zero energy use. As ZEPI sets an absolute and unified scale for all building types, we use the ZEPI scale to plot the commercial code cycle advancement. Here in this graph, we show the scenarios that we use to model hypothetical potential energy savings from updates to the commercial energy code. On the x-axis, we have the timeline. On the y-axis, we show the ZEPI score. First off, we modeled a Minnesota business-as-usual scenario based on trends from past code cycles, shown as the green line here in the graph. The business-as-usual scenario assumes that Minnesota continues on its typical 6-year adoption cycle of ASHRAE 90.1 through 2050. The incremental improvements on the ZEPI scale are based on historical ASHRAE trends, as well as assumptions based on recent studies, and are shown without the impacts of renewable energy. We then compare that to a hypothetical scenario that reaches net zero in the year 2036, which is the Minnesota Accelerated Commercial Base Code scenario, shown as the purple line here with MCEC marked on each cycle. Beginning with the adoption of ASHRAE 90.1 2022 in the year 2024, it follows an accelerated 3-year adoption cycle. Improved energy efficiency code amendments, as well as renewable energy components, are added from year 2027 onwards, when the code reaches a point where energy efficiency alone may not be able to achieve target ZEPI scores. One important thing to note is that we don't necessarily recommend these precise code trajectories. They represent just one hypothetical scenario and not a forecast, and are intended to show an approximate order of magnitude of savings potential. Note that each of these code cycles will require careful consideration of technical feasibility and cost effectiveness. Now, let's take a look at the hypothetical scenarios for the residential energy code. On the x-axis, we have the timeline. On the y-axis, we show the energy use intensity, or EUI, with units of kBtu per square foot. The Minnesota business as usual scenario assumes that Minnesota adopts IECC 2018 by the year 2023, and then continues their typical 6-year IECC adoption cycle through 2050 without the effects of renewable energy, shown as the green line on the graph here. We assumed a 10% incremental improvement per code cycle after IECC 2018. We then compare that to a hypothetical scenario that reaches net zero in the year 2044, which is the Minnesota Accelerated Residential Base Code scenario, shown as a dark blue line here with MREC marked on each cycle. It begins with the adoption of IECC 2021 in the year 2023, and then follows a 3-year adoption cycle of Model IECC code. A renewable energy component will be added from 2026 onwards. As with the commercial modeling, we don't necessarily recommend these precise code trajectories, as this is just one hypothetical scenario intended to show an approximate order of magnitude of savings potential. Similarly, each code cycle will require careful consideration of technical feasibility and cost effectiveness. We also caution that the residential savings in the study are likely less certain compared to the commercial savings. So the potential energy savings for both commercial and residential base energy code are calculated based on the difference between the two hypothetical scenarios, Minnesota business as usual and Minnesota accelerated base code. For the commercial code, we use the change in energy use between two ASHRAE 90.1 model code cycles based on the DOE determination studies, weighted by building segment, as the base building block for the savings calculations. We then applied savings multipliers to account for additional savings from updated code amendments, which achieves necessary energy efficiency reduction targets while still encompassing a realistic amount of renewable energy production. In order to scale the impact of individual EUI changes, we used recent construction volume data for Minnesota to extrapolate the total potential savings statewide. Similarly, for residential code, we use the EUI difference between two IECC model codes as the energy efficiency savings basis. To scale the impact statewide, we use recent residential new construction volume for Minnesota. New construction growth rates, as well as energy code compliance rates, are included in the calculations for both commercial and residential. Now, I'm going to hand it back over to Alex.
Thanks, Danielle. In addition to developing savings estimates for the building code advancement activities, we also develop savings estimates for a compliance improvement program and also for appliance standards, as shown here. So appliance and equipment standards represent a relatively large savings opportunity for a code and standards program. For those not familiar, appliance standards can be established either at the state or federal level. And once a standard is established at the federal level, states are preempted from adopting standards more or less stringent than those levels. And over the last 3+ decades, the federal government has added more and more product categories. So there's many products that are covered at the federal level now. For the purposes of this report, we developed savings analysis for 19 product categories associated with state standards and 47 different product categories associated with federal product categories. The work really builds on a lot of the work that's been done by the Appliance Standards Awareness Project, or ASAP, in coordination with American Council for Energy Efficiency Economy, or ACEEE. In our final report and scenario model, we include a lot of discussion and details on the savings methodology and results. But given time constraints today, we'll just make a plug to check out the final report. If you're interested in seeing those details, it's kind of a snapshot of some of the tables. We cover electric, gas, and carbon savings by year through 2050 for each of the different sub-program activities. Now I'd like to shift to highlighting some recommendations from the report. And again, unfortunately, we don't have time to go through all the detailed recommendations, but we want to provide some high-level ones. First, I just want to note that a successful program can start small and build over time. In our report, we present recommendations related to building up a pretty significant and robust program over many years. We don't think it's feasible to implement all these recommendations right out of the gate, but some can be gradually introduced into the future. Thus, kind of recommend dipping the toe in the water first and then building from there as the program gains important experience. For the program launch and administration recommendations, I want to highlight a couple recommendations. First off, we do recommend aiming for statewide coordination whenever possible, given the nature of the program and its statewide impacts. To do this, we recommend that utilities establish a Minnesota Energy Codes and Standards Utility Working Group. We suggest that the largest utilities would make sense to jointly develop and launch the initial program. And we suggest that one or two of those utilities kind of takes the lead role in program initiations, program filings, and utility coordination. Once that utility working group is established, we would recommend that it meets 6 to 12 times a year and aims to coordinate on a number of activities, some of the more important ones listed here. So SIP plan development, coordinating co-funding arrangements, sub-program activity review and prioritization. In a couple slides, we'll talk about what we mean by sub-programs. Stakeholder engagement coordination is essential and important. Coordinating on the savings estimates and the program evaluation and that methodology development and how it evolves over time. And of course, contractor review and selection. We also want to note that there are some pretty meaty topics that will require ongoing study, both by a potential utilities work group and certainly by other stakeholders. This is not an exhaustive list, but wanted to highlight a couple things here. So, how will renewable energy requirements be handled as the building code approaches net zero? We have provided some assumptions in our report, but again, that's going to be evolving and will need to be looked at an ongoing basis. How will the evolving beneficial electrification policies impact a codes and standards program? How to handle savings accounting and non-enforcement jurisdictions and the interplay of potential spillover impacts. And then finally, how will program evolve if a market transformation program model is launched in Minnesota? I know some folks probably on this call have been thinking about that. Codes and standards is certainly an integral part of a market transformation program. In terms of program savings methodology and allocation, just want to highlight some of the recommendations. And again, the report provides more detail here. We do recommend utilizing the Codes and Standards Program General Evaluation and Attribution Model framework. It's kind of a starting basis for estimating and reporting SIP savings. For those not familiar with this, we describe it in the report. It was described in detail during webinar number 3, which was recorded and posted on our project website. We recommend that the utilities contract with an independent E&B firm with Codes and Standards Program evaluation expertise to kind of guide the savings evaluation process. We recommend that Savings are allocated to participating utilities based off the percentage of electricity or gas they provide, as long as they fund the program in roughly equivalent proportion. And finally, we recommend that the next update to Minnesota's energy efficiency potential study includes savings potential from Codes and Standards program activities. This slide provides some initial estimates to help inform staffing and budget estimates. These can vary significantly based off sub-program activities and utility priorities, but we wanted to provide some initial estimates. So for the lead utility or utilities, we recommend an initial FTE allocation in the 0.75 to 1.5 range. We think this could potentially grow to 2 to 4 FTE over time, and ideally there would be some staff overlap with the new construction programs, given the synergies. For support utilities, we're recommending allocating at least a quarter FTE internal staff to make sure there's someone to attend the working group meetings and to cover the other administrative activities. For implementation contractors, recommend an initial FTE allocation in the 2 to 4 range. This could grow to 4 to 10 plus over time. And then finally, recommend utilizing a separate EM&V contractor, maybe starting around 0.5 to 1 FTE, and this could grow a bit over time as well. I'll close this slide by reading a quote from a Utility Codes and Standards Program Manager from another state that recommends a strong, broad set of consulting teams is important to develop dedicated, stable staff to avoid turnover in projects that often take 5 years or more. In-house, you need staff with a technical and policy background who can provide the operational support and contract management. I mentioned this idea of sub-programs earlier. We do recommend that a program is kind of organized into different sub-programs to help structure the different various activities. We think the working group should determine which sub-programs to prioritize at program launch and which ones to develop in the future. The report provides recommendations for 7 different sub-programs listed here, from state building code advancement, state appliance standard advancement, national codes and standards advancement, compliance improvement, local engagement, code readiness, and planning and coordination. Given time constraints for today, we don't have time to cover all the recommendations. So we're just going to highlight 3 sub-programs: the state building energy code advancement, the national code and standard advancement, and the building codes compliance improvement. So I'll first start talking about the state building energy codes advancement sub-program. And the recommendations for this sub-program are oriented towards supporting the recent Dali and Commerce Building Efficiency Workgroup recommendations, which I mentioned earlier. In particular, we think it'd be beneficial to coordinate with Dali staff, that are leading the energy code updates to determine what data and activities would be most helpful to support the net zero by 2036 goal. And then also the specific goals articulated in the report, including supporting the development of a cost analysis, particularly in climate zone 6 and 7, supporting the development of a market capacity analysis that includes research about markets' abilities to design, build, and operate more efficient buildings, supporting education and training. This would be informed by that market capacity analysis to expand on existing training efforts in the state, helping to engage with stakeholders. This is really important. Includes engagement with builders, energy efficiency experts, architects, local governments, labor, and others. Help to explore ways to pilot or test new emerging building models. And this can be a really important connection to the new construction programs. And then finally, helping to learn more about the needs of other building segments. The Dali Commerce report focused primarily on commercial and multifamily buildings, but also recommended further analysis and study related to residential construction, or existing buildings. In addition, for this sub-program, we recommend seeking representation on the Energy Code Technical Advisory Group, which is set up as part of Dolly's Construction Code Advisory Council. We recommend determining the priority areas for which the sub-program should focus on. And then once those priority areas are chosen, conducting an assessment on how the future building codes may impact current and future incentive programs. And then also for those priority areas, developing a codes and standards enhancement reports that will support adoption efforts by Dolly. The content of those case reports would need to be further discussed, within the work group, but at a minimum, those would ideally include kind of the summary of a market analysis, energy and economic analysis, engineering analysis, leading up to a code change proposal and the associated energy savings with that code change proposal. I'm now going to hand it off to Maureen to discuss some recommendations for a compliance improvement subprogram.
Thanks, Alex. We strongly recommend that a Minnesota Codes and Standards program include a Building Codes Compliance Improvement subprogram. At a minimum, this subprogram can help to increase compliance and reach the full potential of the Energy Code. Our scenario model includes savings estimates based on the results of related CARD studies and existing codes and standards programs. Significant energy savings are available from both reaching the full potential of the Energy Code as well as expanding the implementation of beyond code opportunities. We've identified 4 areas where a Building Codes Compliance Improvement subprogram can provide support for reaching the full potential of the Energy Code. For code officials, for design teams, and specifically for controls documentation and commissioning in commercial buildings and mechanical ventilation systems in residential buildings. CARD studies have found opportunities for code officials to achieve additional savings by educating design teams about code requirements, catching non-compliant and/or undocumented code elements during plan review, and verifying commonly non-compliant elements through on-site inspections. However, code officials often lack the time and tools needed to enforce increasingly complex energy code provisions on top of the many other codes they are responsible for that support the health and safety of the public. To overcome this challenge, we recommend offering multiple support options, including using both a circuit rider model and the services of third-party energy code reviewers. More detail on these recommendations can be found in our full report. Recent CARD studies also found that design team support can help increase energy savings by minimizing the number of code elements that are either not specified in the design documents or specified but not meeting energy code requirements. This starts with making sure that different code pathways are understood and specified on the construction documents. In Slipstream's 2020 Minnesota Commercial Energy Baseline Study, 33 of the 78 projects did not indicate whether IECC or ASHRAE was used. Based on findings from Minnesota's 2018 Commercial Energy Code Compliance Enhancement Pilot conducted by CEE, we recommend providing design team education through code officials and focusing on early design phase meetings and quick reference tools. The Commercial Energy Baseline Study also found that noncompliance with control code elements and commissioning contributed to over 3/4 of total lost energy savings in commercial buildings, primarily due to a lack of clear documentation. To address this, we recommend providing education to owners about the value of commissioning, providing owners, project teams, and commissioning agents with more clear guidance on the commissioning expectations for their project, and supporting the enforcement of controls through plan review to make sure all elements are well documented. On the residential side, Slipstream's recent study on energy savings opportunities in homes indicates that more research is needed on the installation and operation of balanced mechanical ventilation systems. Minnesota is unique in the country in this requirement, which in most cases means the installation of a heat recovery or energy recovery ventilator. The study found widespread issues with these systems. To achieve the full potential of the code, we recommend stepping up training, education, and incentives related to residential mechanical ventilation. Finally, we recommend that a building codes compliance improvement subprogram coordinate with existing new construction programs implemented by Minnesota utilities. These programs offer an already established touchpoint with residential builders and commercial design and construction teams that could be leveraged to provide energy code support and resources. Now I'll turn it back to Alex to discuss additional recommendations and wrap up.
Thanks, Maureen. I'd like to touch upon some recommendations for a potential National Codes and Standards Advancement subprogram. So first, we recommend reviewing the scenario model and determining if there are opportunities to improve the savings estimates. And then also really determining which of the, we have 47 product categories in there. Which of those 47 product categories the program wants to prioritize for advancement activities. Once those priority product categories have been chosen, then there's some next steps here in terms of conducting an assessment to evaluate how future standards may impact kind of current and future incentive programs. Setting up coordination calls with key utilities and state agencies that are actively involved in administrating code standards programs that include federal standards advancement efforts. There are a lot of opportunities to partner with code and standard programs in other states to share data and resources. It's an opportunity to potentially lower some costs to the program through that coordination. And then developing and executing a specific work plan associated with those priority product categories. Again, with the real goal of providing technical assistance and data to the rulemakings. Finally, there's a lot of activity at the within national model codes that have very important implications for appliance standards and building codes, and frankly, a lot of that useful information that would be beneficial to incentive programs as well. So we do consider exploring opportunities to partner, to participate in those National Codes and Standards Committee activities, primarily focused on ASHRAE 90.1, IECC or the IGCC. Again, there's a lot more detail on each of these recommendations in the final report. Just wanted to provide a high-level summary here. And again, we want to make sure we save time for Q&A today. So we hope this presentation kind of spurred some interest for those that are interested in getting more details. We encourage you to check out the final report and also the project website for some of those past webinars if you weren't able to catch those. Finally, I'm reminded of this proverb when thinking about codes and standards programs. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. I do think this applies to codes and standards programs, especially since savings can lag program activities, sometimes by years. However, once those savings do occur, they are typically long-term, persistent, reliable, and the most cost-effective in the portfolio. Thus, launching a successful program will require some kind of longer-term vision and commitment. And with that, I'd like to thank the Department of Commerce once again. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today and their attention. And I'd like to hand it back to Mary Sue and Adaway to facilitate the Q&A session.
Thanks. Thank you all for that great presentation. If you have not already done so, please type any additional questions into the Q&A panel and send them to all of us. Please use the Q&A rather than the chat panel. And Adoy, do you have any questions for anyone on the research team?
Thank you, Mary Sue, and thank you to all the presenters. We have a whole lot of questions arriving, so I'll get to it right now. First question was about where can the final report be found and where would the slides from the presentation be available?
Mary Sue,
I'll address that. Yeah, I'll address that after the Q&A. I'll address that. So.
Okay, great.
Okay. Is the modeling tool also posted for review?
We are still discussing with Commerce whether that will be posted. I think that likely will be posted with the final report. If the questioner is interested in seeing that, I'm happy to share that as well, so they can reach out to me.
Okay. Were the number of consultants shown in the planning shared between all utilities or per utility?
Those were modeled on for the program, so all utilities, not per utility.
Okay. We are aware that California used a Delphi method for developing estimates of savings associated with IOU involvement in codes and standards. Is this the method still used for estimates? And if so, can you explain if this is the recommended approach for estimating savings for IOU codes and standards program activities in Minnesota?
Yeah, I can touch on that a little bit, and I can use an extra slide here because I thought this may come up. Without getting too deep into this, some folks have seen this, but this is the general evaluation attribution model. So just to provide some context in answering this question, the progression goes from your potential savings, and then you reduce the savings based off non-compliance estimates, and then you further reduce those based off of assume would have occurred naturally, from a term that some people use as naturally occurring market adoption. And then there's an attempt to assign attribution to the program. And this typically is where the, sorry, we're getting some background typing there. This is where there's the, sometimes the Delphi model, as the questioner mentioned, in California. That's where you bring in stakeholders that were involved in the process, you ask them a number of questions, and you attempt to determine the attribution. We're not explicitly stating that would need to be handled. We do recommend that this is a starting framework, but we want Minnesota with the utilities, in coordination with Commerce, to modify this for what makes sense to Minnesota. Again, that's one area that there needs to be comfort, I think, in terms of making sure stakeholders feel like the savings are real and accurate. That is an area that other states have explored as an opportunity to reduce some costs and not going through that full-blown Delphi process. So we're not stating explicitly that that's necessarily needs to be an essential, or it could be a streamlined version of that.
Thank you for that. Also, unlike California, Minnesota utilities don't have case studies. Is there a similar approach suggested for Minnesota? Also, is there an estimate of the percentage of total savings that IOUs might expect from respective sub-programs? I think this is referring to slide 30.
Yeah, well, can you repeat the first part of that? I have something for the second part, but I just want to make sure I got the first part.
So also, unlike California, Minnesota does not have case studies. Case might be an acronym for something. I'm not sure. Is there a similar approach suggested for Minnesota?
Okay, yeah. So on the case studies, yeah, there isn't a program right now so we are recommending that as part of if a program is developed, that there would be an output similar to a case report, which I mentioned is an acronym for Codes and Standards Enhancement. It doesn't necessarily need to be called that, but at a high level, it would be focused on providing support for a code update. The second part of that question, we didn't get into this, but now that the question is asked, here's just kind of a snapshot of, this is in the report and in the model. Again, this is not necessarily a forecast. This is a scenario based off a number of assumptions that could change. But what this shows here is, just to give you a highlight of what's in the report, we have the different sub-programs listed, if you can't see that, and then the total program. For each of the sub-programs, we have the potential energy savings, gross energy savings, net savings, and net program savings that connects back to the attribution model that I showed. And then the percentages here are the percentages relative to the SIP performance levels from 2017, which is the last publicly posted levels. So you can see how the savings kind of decrease as you go through that progression of going from potential to net program savings. At a high level in this particular scenario, which includes, again, a robust program, including all the sub-programs, potential energy savings for electric is on the order of 100% of SIP performance, 48% gas, and 82% in carbon. But then as those go through the progression of down to net program savings, we're about 33% of the portfolio electric, 16 for gas, and 26 for carbon.
Thank you. Will the mention of the 5-year or more time horizon, how do you handle asynchronous investment and savings?
Yeah, I mean, that's unique with codes and standards. So I think, again, I wish I had an easy solution to that, but I think that goes back to this closing slide here. It does kind of require that longer term perspective.
Are there any recommendations related to existing buildings? Building energy codes can have an important impact on potential energy savings following building alteration. Traditional education and training sometimes ignores building alterations.
Yeah, we get into that a little bit with, again, because the Dolly Commerce report focused mostly on commercial and multifamily. That's where we focus the initial savings estimates for new construction, but fully agree that existing buildings is often where the majority of savings opportunity is. There it occurs. So we touch on that as an important element for the program to continue to explore, for sure.
Yeah. Can you describe what a circuit rider is or does?
Maureen, do you want to handle that one?
Sure. A circuit rider is an individual who delivers energy code resources and on-call project technical support to code officials. This model provides support to code officials without any one jurisdiction needing to invest in these kinds of resources. So it's kind of a shared resource across jurisdictions that would travel between or throughout the state.
And I'll just, coming back to the question about the 5 years, again, that was just one anecdote. So everything doesn't have a 5-year delay. You really need to look at every situational basis, but I would say on the compliance improvement, that's the one sub-program where the lag is probably the shortest. And after that, state standards often can have a shorter lag compared to federal standards.
Thank you. Was there any thought given to European models of performance standards, BTU per square feet, rather than the US prescriptive models?
Can you repeat the first part of that?
Was any thought given to European model of performance standard rather than the, yeah?
No, we did not look at European models.
Is there any consideration given to how the increased product cost associated with higher standards might impact low-income customers if there are no longer utility rebates available to offset the incremental cost of higher efficiency products?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that really needs to be looked at in every time you assess a appliance standard. The detailed reports that we base some of the studies on, a lot of information has been put out by ASAP and ACEEE, looking at the cost effectiveness, both first cost impacts and lifetime impacts. And typically you don't want to pursue a standard if the net benefit to the consumer increases. Or I'm sorry, the net cost to consumers increase.
Was there any mention of states that are most prominent in terms of codes and standards programs?
Yeah, we get into a lot of that in the report, and we have a section on that, and then an appendix that highlights examples from other states. Webinar 1, which actually I might be able to pull up here. Our project website here, again, we had 3 webinars. The first one was focused on program administrators and highlighted examples from other states. 2, we brought in state officials and specialists, again, bringing some perspectives from other states as well. And then the third one focused on program evaluation. I would highlight webinar 1 for the questioner that asked that. We talk about this in the report, but also, just for today, if you want to check this out. Webinar 1 brought in Jeff Harris, who is at Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, Kevin Rose, who leads the Code and Standards Program at National Grid on the East Coast, Chris Corcoran, who leads NYSERDA's program, and then Pat Eilert, who leads PG&E's program in California. So between California, New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and the Pacific Northwest, those are the most robust programs active now.
So I don't have any more questions in the Q&A panel, but I had a question of my own. I was wondering if you could comment on how the cost effectiveness of the Codes and Standards program compares to other traditional energy efficiency programs?
Sure. I actually have a slide that touches on that as well. So this is a graphic that was developed by LBNL, not by us, but I thought it was useful. And this data, actually the report is published in 2018, so probably looking at data prior to that. This is, if you can't see this, they looked at savings in terms of across many different energy efficiency programs across the United States. They stacked the cost. So this is the program administrator cost of saved electricity. It's in 2016 dollars per kWh saved. Codes and Standards is here. So it's a fraction of a penny per kWh. And then you can see how that compares to residential program, a number of C&I programs, all the way up to the low income program. So again, this is pulling from only a couple different regions in the state, and so it's always going to be a little bit different, and really need to be careful in terms of really understanding the metrics in terms of what type of kWh that is. But generally, in terms of other programs, the Code Standards program is usually the most cost effective, usually a fraction compared to the other programs in the portfolio.
Do you have a version of this that is inclusive of customer incremental costs?
The version of the LBNL report, I don't think they had that. If there are other studies out there that have looked at that extensively, it really would depend on if the questioner is interested in building codes or appliance standards. If they're interested, please reach out to me. I can see if I can send them in the right direction there.
And then the last question I had was, what would be the best way to learn more about Codes and Standards program models being implemented in other states?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a fair amount in the report, and then also the project website, and those probably webinar 1, but to some extent webinar 2 and 3 also.
Thank you, Alex. I think those are all the questions I have.
Great, thank you. I know Mary Sue has some wrap-up slides here, so you can hand it back.
Great, thank you, Alex, and Maureen. Thank you for those really great answers to those questions. Very thorough. And thanks, Adoy, for monitoring the questions and managing that. If you have further follow-up questions about this card project, feel free to contact one of us. Our contact information is on this slide. Now, next slide. As to the recording and the report, the best way to do it is to funnel information through this, through our card website. And those will all be available through this website on another page. There's links here to the final report, which will be available probably in a couple of months. And there's quick links here for the report, for the webinar, and for other facts and guidelines and stuff like that, which is where we would post the tool if it is posted. And this R&D webpage also has additional resources and information related to CARD that you can access, so it's good to check it out. And in the meantime, if someone wants the slide set from the project today, I can send it to them. Just email me. But thanks for participating today. We appreciate your interest in CARD, and currently there are no upcoming CARD webinars scheduled. However, to keep abreast of CARD webinars that are scheduled, as they are scheduled, and other news related to the Conservation Improvement Program, please sign up for SIP updates through our email list. There's a link here you can use to do that. In the meantime, contact me if you have questions or suggestions about the CARD program or webinars. And then finally, just as a reminder, there will be a short evaluation that launches after this webinar closes, so please take a few minutes to fill it out to let us know how we did today. And that's it for today's webinar. Thank you very much for participating and have a good rest of your day.